Hi, this is Joe Green, head pastor of the Baptist Church located. I think I'm live now. Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement. And I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. We live in an age right now that there's a very clear, distinctive agenda that's being promoted in the country, especially. And that's Marxist. You've heard me talk about socialism before. You hear me talk about globalism. I'm talking about Marxism. They're all pretty much the same because when you think about globalists and you think about the ruling elite, that their actual preferred form of government is communism. And communism, of course, comes from the ideology behind Marxism, is the government of choice for globalists, right? So when you understand the globalists, the ruling elite, when you understand those people, that they have an agenda, and that in their documents and their philosophy and how they view their worldview is that they believe that there's only a certain small group of people that have the ability, the talent, and the worthiness to be able to rule over humanity, right? It's the ruling class. Goes all the way back to Plato's Republic, and when he talked about this philosophy of the philosopher king. And so they kind of envision themselves as that, very intelligent people that also have authority to rule over. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about how that is becoming more and more prevalent, because within the ideal of this philosopher king, you have people that carry out their agenda, and the minstrels or the entertainers. Also, you have the governmental people, right? So they believe that they are the philosopher kings. They're the ones behind the scenes actually pulling the strings and running things, but yet they utilize the entertainers. And when I talk about the minstrels or the entertainers, the entertaining class, which now in this society is you have professional sports, you have Hollywood, you have the music industry, and you also have the media, mainstream media, because after 1980, I believe it was, when CNN started this 24-hour news cycle, and you have now these news networks where the personalities, the news personalities, actually become entertainers because they have to entertain you, right? I heard a report of one of the journalists that said how he dreaded the very short news cycles. Every day you had, like, for instance, the 5 o'clock news. Let's say the 5 o'clock news, it's probably about 15 minutes worth of news. Then you had other entertaining things, and then you went on about your business. But now when you have 24-hour news cycles, the news has to become entertaining because they need to keep your attention and competing with other news cycles. So when you think about the entertainer class, you think about professional athletes, you think about the media personalities, think about music and movies and television and all those things. Those are based on what Plato's philosophy was, and how you rule over the masses. Is they use those people in order to promote their agenda, to keep the masses distracted, and to actually shape public opinion or shape the culture. And you see that's very effective. That's why if you look in the news, the media, pretty much they have to carry on a certain agenda. If they go off script, they get in trouble, they get blackballed, they get publicly mocked or whatever, or humiliated. For instance, when they promoted the idea of same-sex marriage as being normal, then anybody who publicly says they're against that, if you're and you have freedom of speech, but there's repercussions to your freedom of speech, right? So if a person in Hollywood gets up in front of everybody and publicly makes a statement that they are for traditional marriage and not for gay marriage, then they would get blackballed, they get killed, or they will lose jobs. And many of them have expressed that, how you have to be a liberal in Hollywood. You have to promote a certain ideology, or else you won't get the work that you want. So anyway, that's communism. Is the governmental arm of the New World Order, one world governmental system, the ruling elite, whatever term you want to use, because Marxism is a very important thing for us to understand. Now, Marxism is a governmental system I mean, it's a philosophy that promotes a governmental system that actually replaces God. So Marxism is based in atheism. So Marxist Leninist atheism, also known as Marxist Leninist scientific atheism, is an irreligious and anti-clerical element of Marxism Leninism, the official state ideology formerly of the Soviet Union. And it's becoming more and more prevalent. So people want to, the foundation of the Soviet Union was based on this. But we understand that, I want you to understand that that was just some of these nations are test subjects for them to promote their one world governmental system. If you look in the Soviet Union, and the actual international bankers were behind that. And so many of these people, Karl Marx and these people, they were these. I'll get into that. If you look at my YouTube channel, please subscribe and look through it. I go in a little bit more detail about how they weren't who they portrayed themselves to be. If you look at China and communist China, they use these nations in order to perfect their governmental strategy and how to seize power from other people. So, so based on dialectical materialist understanding of humanity's place in nature, Marxist-Leninist atheism proposed that religion is the opium of the people. So what they're saying is of course, it was based in atheism because the state becomes God, right? These people, these ruling elite people, think that they have the authority to operate and function as gods on the earth. Which goes all the way back to Genesis 3, right? With the serpent deceived Adam and Eve, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you'll be like gods, right? You'll be able to determine what's good and what's evil, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, you have to understand that that's what this is based on, atheism. They said that religion is the opioid of the masses, which is why one of the things that they do most of the time is they either ban religion altogether, or they control. You have a state church. So the government runs the church, either one. Sometimes they'll allow you to have churches. Most of the time they shut this idea that religion is the opium. It means that so what does that mean? Let me explain that to you. What they're saying is that religion is just something made up by people. There's nothing to it. There's no real God. There's not a God. There's not a supreme being. That religion is created to make people feel better. That's what that term means, the opium of the masses. Marxist Leninism advocates atheism rather than religious beliefs. To support these ideological premises, Marxist-Leninist atheism explains the origin of religion and explains methods for the scientific criticism of religion. The philosophic roots of materialist atheism are the works of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. You'll hear me talk about Hegel a lot, refer to Hegelian dialectic and the philosophy behind Hegel. He was one of these great philosophers from Germany. So he gave the roots of this ideology. You also had a couple other people, Ludwig Feuerbach, if you get a chance to look him up, Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, of course, you hear me make mention to him. So that's the basis for it. So Marxism is based in atheism. Right, it's the belief that there is no God because the state has to replace God or replaces God. And if you look throughout the scriptures, God warns them because this philosophy is not a new philosophy. You know, it's new to us and it's new to the Western culture. Well, it's not new, but it came through the Western culture through Karl Marx. But these are philosophies that existed for a long time. If you read some of Plato and Socrates and some of those ancient Greek philosophers, they kind of give you some insight as to the same belief system that these people carry, right? So it's not a new thing. It's just something that it reaps itself in a different way, right? So Marxist, at the end of the day, it replaces God in all aspects of life. The government becomes God. Communism, of course, as I said, is the ultimate goal of the ruling elite. Now, here's some of the things that it promotes, right? The idea that man can ultimately determine what's good and what's evil. So they promote the idea that there is no absolute truth, right? We know that the Bible describes itself as absolute truth. So they tell you that there is no absolute truth and that truth is subjective or can evolve, right? So they promote that idea. And the reason that's an anti-God sentiment because God is the one ultimately that gives us truth, right? Our morals come from this ideal of God. If you take away the ideal of God or a supreme deity who has the ultimate authority, the sovereign God, if you take away that understanding, then man ultimately becomes God, because we're the ones who can determine what's good and what's evil. And it can change. The idea of dialectic from the Greek philosophy was that there is no absolute truth, and that whoever can give the best argument, then their ideology prevails. So Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, those type of guys, many of them participated in this idea that there was no absolute truth. Another basis for this, or foundational belief of this, the government convinces the people that it will provide for their needs. So when you understand communism, there's no personal property ownership, right? The state owns everything, and everybody shares everything, right? And it sounds like a good idea, because what it does is it promotes the idea that this is for the good of humanity. But ultimately, the only thing it's doing is taking away personal freedoms and putting your freedoms in the hand of the state government, right? So whoever is in charge of the government ultimately becomes the one who determines everything. It takes away your personal rights and your personal liberties. So you have to realize how dangerous that is, and it doesn't work, because, like the old saying says, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you give someone complete control of your life, ultimately it leads to tyranny, right? It leads to fascism. It leads to all those things that the current liberals try to pretend like they're trying to fight against. So like Antifa, which is based on Marxism, is trying to pretend like Antifa stands for anti-fascism. But ultimately, what happens is Marxism leads to fascism. It leads to tyranny. It always does. Anytime you put a power in the hands of a small amount of people over the masses, it leads to tyranny. It leads to abuse. It leads to all those things, right, that we don't want in this country. But you're constantly deceived and convinced that it leads to something good. And it's always ironic to me that Antifa is supposed to be anti-fascist, but it's being funded in part by George Soros, who worked with the Nazis during the Nazis in Germany. He's on record saying that. He had a 60-minute interview where he admitted that his mentor or his guardian was a Nazi who he worked with to help to displace other Jews, and he's a Jew. So if you do the research and find out, the irony is just overwhelming when you look at it. So anyway, the government convinces the people that it's going to take care of their needs. So food, shelter, and health are three of the main things that the government will convince people that it can control or can help you with, right? Socialism is a part of Marxism as well. And so when you have this idea that's becoming more and more prevalent, which is why Bernie Sanders has become so popular now, because he's a socialist, and the Democratic Party is very much leaning towards socialism right now as part of their major platform. It convinces the people that it's going to take care of their needs, that you're going to have free stuff. You're going to have free education. You're going to have a free house. You're going to have free health care. You're going to have free all these things. But we all know that there's nothing free. It just means that you're not going to pay for it, but someone else does. And think about it. Ultimately, the other people that are paying for your free stuff, quote unquote free stuff, are people that are doing it involuntarily. So for instance, if I have a child that's going to college, if you decided that, hey, I want to fund your child's education, then that's your right. You have a right to do that. They have scholarships. They have all these type of things where people are voluntarily paying for someone else's child to go to school. That's okay. That's a good thing. But in socialism, you don't have that opportunity. Pay for someone else's stuff, whether you want to or not. Point blank. That's how that works. And so Deuteronomy 8, when you get a chance, God tells Israel, he reminds them, because these ancient civilizations were along these lines. It was along the line of communism. Nimrod was perfecting communism in the Tower of Babel, and so all these ancient civilizations had the same philosophy. It's not a new one. Like I said, these are philosophies that go all the way back many centuries. So anyway, the government convinces the people that it's going to take care of the needs, and primarily food, shelter, health. That's one of the selling points. but ultimately you are giving up your individual rights and individual freedoms for that. Now, communism attacks property ownership. Marxism attacks individual property ownership and individual wealth. It also has to weaken the family unit because the strong family units bring liberty, brings freedom, individual freedoms. So in order for you to do away with individual freedoms and liberties, you have to destroy or break down what's known as the nuclear family, or the Judeo-Christian Western family structure. And so you'll hear that more and more in the media now. You hear them attacking the family structure or redefining the family is one of the things they try to do. They try to tell you that wealth is bad. So one of the things, and the Bible talks about Satan, who is an accuser of the brethren. So they're constantly accusing one group of people to another. So they're constantly telling people, when you see somebody who's very wealthy, they'll say they're evil. The reason that you are poor is because of this person has wealth. And so they pitch you, they pit this idea that wealth is evil. But think about this. People have gained wealth by, immoral gains. That's a fact. But wealth isn't evil. Money isn't evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil, right? So ultimately, when they continue to convince you that money is bad, they do it from a standpoint that now you're not going to look for personal ownership or to develop wealth, individual wealth, right? They got to take it from somewhere else. But think about this. It's not fair if you were to go out here tomorrow, for instance, they try and they'll paint this picture of capitalism is so evil. Capitalism is so evil. And I heard a saying once, the person was saying, which was so ironic, they're tweeting from their iPhone of how evil capitalism is. But the reason you have an iPhone is because of capitalism. The reason we have smartphones and we have all these things that we have is because of capitalism, right? So anyway, they give you this idea that that wealth is evil. But what happens? Think about this for instance. Think about Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs went out, brilliant mind, the founder of Apple. They did some phenomenal things as far as technology goes, and because of that, he gained a massive amount of wealth. Right. So when he passed on, I'm sure he probably had a will or something, or whoever he gave. He left an inheritance for somebody, or some of them don't give it to their children. Some of them give them to charity, but that was their right to pass that on. But what they're telling you, what Marxism tells you, is that's evil and that's wicked. And it's not fair. Why should my kids not be able to benefit off of my hard work or my creativity, right? And so ultimately Marxism is stealing. Socialism is about stealing. I think about back during the time of the Soviet Union in the Olympics. A lot of these athletes from the Soviet Union were competing against other athletes that were professional or high, like for instance, let's say boxing, right? So you have a person that's boxing in the Olympic behalf of the Soviet Union. They're a world-class boxer. But guess what? They'll never become wealthy off of boxing because they're a property of the state. So whatever they do benefits the state. It doesn't benefit the individual. Inversely, in the United States, we have people that are great boxers, athletic. They work hard to make their gifts even better. They go out and people pay a whole bunch of money. Thousands of people, millions of people pay money to see them, to that they perfected their talents, but yet they benefit from it, right? That's part of capitalism. If you go create, if you're a great singer, you're God gifted with a great voice, and you go out and you sing, and the people buy your records, or a bunch of people pay money to come see you in concert, you should benefit off of that, right? Not the state, not the government. It's not fair, but that's what happens. That's the idea behind Marxism. And they try to make you believe that it's evil for you to gain wealth. So they attack personal property ownership. They have to weaken the family structure. And here's the key. Here's one of the things I want to get to is they've infiltrated the educational system, right? So what happens is, they had this idea, this blueprint in the late 1800s of how they wanted the New World Order to be perfected, right? So part of what they did in Germany is they developed the educational system in a way that doesn't encourage individual thought, but it promotes compliance. It promotes you to fit in, right? To not only comply, but for you to kind of go along with everything else. And the United States, there's a gentleman by the name of Bloom who's very instrumental in all the modern education here in the United States. Our educational system is based on the Prussian model, which teaches compliance. That's why in schools, they're not really teaching you or promoting the idea of individualism, right? We have the same educational system style, basically. I mean, it's getting, recently it's getting different with technology, but before that, what did you have? You had everybody sits in the straight lines in their desks, right? You have a textbook, and a lot of times in high school, you have either yes or no questions or maybe multiple choice, but they're telling you what the answer is. You don't have a lot of room for individual thought. You don't have a lot of room for individuality. And even so you have to realize that this, how they set up the educational system was to teach compliance, right? And to keep the people slave to the system. Now, they're not encouraging entrepreneurship. Now, let me tell you two things in our community, especially the Black community, why that's dangerous, right? So one of the things that they are promoting is this whole thing about having a federal minimum wage. Now, I know a lot of people, this is not going to be very popular, what I'm about to say, but I need you to hear what I'm about to say. They're promoting this idea of a federal minimum wage that should be $15, and people are getting excited about it. Yeah, that's true, because $10 an hour is not a living wage. You can't raise a family on the current minimum wage. Now, see, that's part of the Hegelian dialectic, right? Because what happens is subconsciously, what they're telling you is not to be an entrepreneur, but for you to work for somebody else, always to be a slave, right? That's part of what the communists want to do. They want to promote an idea that you always kind of enslaved to the state. The reason I say that, especially in the African-American community, which in the inner cities, the urban areas, there's a lot of poverty. And so they try to sell you an idea that the answer to poverty is a higher minimum wage or more job opportunities, right? So they're telling the state or the government, you need to provide more opportunities of jobs in the inner city, or you need to raise the minimum wage. But see what that is, that's a bait and switch. That's part of Hegelian dialectic. Why do I say that? Because they should be encouraging entrepreneurship, right? Because the minimum wage was never meant for a man to have a wife and children and a house, a mortgage, and all that other stuff. That wasn't the purpose for a minimum wage. The minimum wage are menial labor jobs that normally would go for either a high school student, which is their first job, they're in school, they're just working there, or a retired person who doesn't need it, or say a mother who, I won't say a mother, but say a person who's married that their spouse works as well, and that's just supplemental income, or something along those lines. That is the purpose for the minimum wage. Okay, the minimum wage wasn't meant for me to be a man working a minimum wage job with a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage. That's not the purpose. It doesn't work that way. The math doesn't work. But it's part of the brainwashing that they continually tell you or encourage you that you should work for somebody else. And they are supposed to help you to take care of your family. Because you think about this, and again, you know, during segregation, we had stronger Black communities because we were dependent upon ourselves. And other cultures, like the Chinese, the Jews, Africans, other cultures aren't fighting out here as much for a higher minimum wage. You know why? Because they have stronger communities and stronger cultures and stronger families. So if you go to Little China or Chinatown in any major city, especially, you see a community of Chinese people. They own their own businesses. They patronize each other. Other people come to their restaurants or their stores, their shops, or, you know, if you go in the Jewish community, especially if you go to like New York, Jewelers Row, they used to have, there was a lot of Jewish jewelers, right? They had the jewelry business, and I don't know if it's still like that, but I know years ago, you know, you go there, their community had their own businesses, right? They own their own businesses. You know, one of the things of economics is that your money circulates in your community a certain amount of times, and the communities that their money circulates around their community a lot of times are stronger communities. They're not begging for a higher minimum wage because they're making their own paycheck by owning their own businesses, right? So that's economics. That's an economics lesson for some of you may not understand that. That's so important. But in the Black community, because we don't have this promotion of entrepreneurship, it's statistically, the dollars in the Black community don't even last a day, don't even circulate around 1 or 2 times in the community. They immediately go outside of the community to other businesses, right? So again, this idea of them promoting to you, that's part of Marxist subconsciously promoting this idea that the government should take care of you, right? The government should help provide for your family, as opposed to, I'm more so that the government allow us the opportunity to establish our own businesses, establish in our own economy so that we can take care. Because if you have your own business, then you can increase your paycheck based on increasing your business, right? You don't have to have someone tell you you're going to make $15 an hour or however much they want you to. So this is kind of psychologically what they do, right? They kind of brainwash you into thinking those that way. The other part of that is, let's talk about education. You know, we have you know, you have liberal versus conservative, you have Democrats versus Republican. And for those who have followed me and listened to me, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, never been a Republican in my life. I was a lifelong Democrat up until recently. Now I'm independent. I start to look at things through a historical lens and from a fact-based lens, not based on emotions and feelings. And I've come to the conclusion and understanding that even in the school system, the public school system, which, as I told you, is based, it's meant to teach governmental dependency and compliance to the state, not individualism and entrepreneurship. That's how it's set up, right? They're not teaching you to be that. But there are some schools, you have charter schools, you have private schools, that some of them may be a little bit different, but we're talking about public schools here. So this idea, I hear people talk about school vouchers, and the liberal mindset or the liberal democratic mindset tells you that that's evil and people are trying to destroy the public school systems. But see, again, that's a psyop, a psychological operation that helps to brainwash you and have you think in a certain way. Why do I say that? Think about this. If I live in the inner city and I live in a school district that is underperforming, but I have a child who is pretty smart, can catch on to things, or he's very, you know, he's a go-getter. And so he's, if you put him in the right environment, he's going to succeed. He's going to prosper, right? So with a school voucher, you could go and take that voucher and send him to a school outside of his school district. But the liberals, they kick against that. And, you know, for the most part, and it's unfortunate because what happens is now that means I'm stuck. If I can't afford to send my child to a high-priced private school, he has to go to the public school system in the area that I live in, and it may be a failing public school system. A lot of these inner cities, and I know this from firsthand, a lot of the inner city schools in many of these larger cities, especially in the urban areas, have underperforming schools. I've heard statistics like 35% graduation rates, 38% graduation rates. If you know that a school district only is graduating 38% of their students, that's a failing school system. Right? So if your child is in that school district and you believe that that school is not providing the means to allow your child to be all that he can be, if you had something like a voucher or something, you could take him and send him to a different school or homeschool him. You know, that's always an option as well. But see, because of the whole Marxist ideology, a lot of times they fight against these things. And ultimately, it ends up putting us in a perpetual cycle of not being able to fulfill all that God has for us to fulfill. So I wanted to share those with you. There's a lot that we can unravel and unpack about Marxism. And the reason that I've been talking more about that is because we need to address the issues as they come up, right? So now Marxism is really being promoted. Black Lives Matter is based, their ideology is based on Marxism. They've said that. I'm not putting anything on them. It's based on Marxism. And there's not enough outcry or pushback, especially from the Black community, to say that we don't stand for Marxism, because Marxism is counterproductive to where we want to go, especially as a pastor, because Marxism, as I shared with you, based on atheism. It's an anti-God, anti-Christ form of government that makes the government God instead of allowing us to serve God the way we should serve him. This has been Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement. Until next time, keep your eyes and your ears open. Peace and blessings to you. Shalom, shalom.